Today, many students go to college with numerous questions about their faith, yearning to know if the seed planted in them as a child is both true and practical. Using the miracle on the road to Emmaus as a model, young adult ministers conversed weekly for 3 months with college students about the most pressing questions they had about the Catholic faith. As they journeyed together virtually, something amazing happened. Doubts disappeared, fears faded, and Jesus revealed that He is still alive. Hearts Burning Within Us, the latest book from Patchwork Heart Ministry, is a result of that grace-infused conversation. It is the perfect back-to-school gift for recent high school graduates and current college students. Get your copy for them today at patchworkheart.org or by calling 424-704-3278. That's 424-704-3278.
In the Gospels, Jesus asks his disciples an important question. Who do you say I am? Over 2,000 years later, this question continues to reverberate in the human heart. Some have only given this question a cursory thought. Others have spent years pondering the answer, searching the scriptures, and looking for evidence. This spring, Fiat Ministry Network and Patchwork Heart Ministry team with researchers and experts who have studied the Shroud of Turin to once again pose Christ's question to you. Who do you say I am?
Hello, and welcome to From Womb to Tomb. This is a presentation from the St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation for Freedom, Family, and Faith. You can learn about us at nonnatus.org. We're also joined by Patchwork Heart Ministry and Fiat Ministry Network. So pleased to be able to collaborate with these two amazing networks and radio podcasts. I am joined on this show by Bill Snyder. He is the founder of Patchwork Heart Ministry. Please check out patchworkheart.org and patchworkheartradio.org. And Mickey Kelly, who is the president of the St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation for Freedom, Family, and Faith. And so this is part 2 of From Womb to Tomb. And on part 1, we did a big focus on abortion and on conception until natural death and what it means to be pro-life in terms of protecting human life and really honoring human life and infants in the womb. And Mickey shared a lot with us about his work in the pro-life world. And it was just a great conversation. So if you didn't get a chance to watch part 1, make sure you go to our website and also to Patchwork Heart Ministry on Facebook and on the website as well, and check it out. So without further ado, Bill, Mickey, thanks so much for joining us.
Always a pleasure to be with you, Ann.
Great to be back again, Ann.
That's right. And so we're going to delve into several topics during the show. We're going to talk about dealing with health issues and sickness, euthanasia, making outreach to people who are feeling marginalized, such as the poor, the sick, and the homeless, people like that, and also end-of-life issues, because the Catholic Church teaches so much about what we need to do in order to help people and to make them feel accepted, loved, because being pro-life really means all of those different stages of life. It, of course, means the beginning of life, which is most important, just being allowed, right? Being allowed to be born into this world and having that right to life. And so on this show, we're going to talk about, how can we continue that? How can we continue to be pro-life from conception all the way through to the end of our lives? And I know on this show, we're also going to talk about issues such as the death penalty too. So why don't we just start with, let's recap a little bit about what we talked about on the last one. Maybe Mickey, you can fill us in on that one.
Sure, Ann. So the debate really begins, like, of course, I think what we've seen in our culture today is that Ronald Reagan had a very good quote when he said that he believed that those who are for abortion are already born. And he wasn't, and there's a lot of truth to that. And we're surrounded in our culture, especially when we look at some of the polls saying that there are like 2/3 Catholics who support abortion. But of course, they also at the same time reject euthanasia, the death penalty, unjust wars, assisted suicide, the case, whatever other forms of human destruction. Yet they accept abortion. And abortion is the abomination of human life. And sadly, I mean, thankfully, there has been a lot of progress, for half a century, thanks to people who have done racketeering for like the late Joe Scheidler. You had a movement that has grown. Many of my peers are a part of it. And, there's a chance that we could be navigating a post-Roe world. But the need to protect life at its most vulnerable stage, the moment of conception, is needed. And as we were talking the last time, we were going back and forth about, being peaceful and mercifully present outside of abortion facilities. And your presence could really make a difference. And also, too, the other thing that we also discussed in the previous episode is that life is sacred, and God is the author of life, and it must never be rejected. It must be defended at all costs.
Absolutely. It must be defended at all costs. And thank you for sharing on that. And with that said, it brings us into this episode number 2. And I'm looking at our catechism, the Catholic Church, in part 3, Life in Christ. It says that in number 2258, that human life is sacred because from its beginning, it involves the creative action of God, and it remains forever in a special relationship with the Creator, who is its sole end. God alone is the Lord, and life from its beginning until its end. No one can, under any circumstance, claim for himself the right directly to destroy an innocent human being. And so, as it goes on in the Catechism, it talks about the respect for human life and the witness of sacred history. And there is quite a history there. Even when we look at the Old Testament, our New Testament, and the command of Christ to honor life. And right, Christ really lived that way. He lived in a way to show all of us that every single life means something. It's important. It means something. I know that when Mickey and I have gone to places like to pray in front of an abortion facility, one time we were walking down the street, and Mickey probably knows the story I'm about to tell, but there was a homeless man on the road, and he was laying there on the sidewalk, and Mickey walked over and he double checked on him. He asked him if he was okay. Did he need anything? Can I help you out, buddy? And, to me, that says a lot in terms of what it really means to be pro-life. I don't know if either of you want to expand on that, because when we care about all human life, including a long time after someone is born, right? Sometimes people accuse those who are involved in pro-life as only being pro-birth, but we know that as Catholics that we're called to be pro-life in every way.
Yeah, absolutely, Ann. And I think one of the big things is that it has to be a consistent ethic, as you just mentioned, right? Like from conception until natural death is what we believe. And when you look at that, when you examine the right to life, it means a right to life from its very, very beginning to its very, very end. And there's some things in there, that we talk about innocent life being the most important thing to protect, right? With abortion. But there are also many other lives. All lives are worth the dignity of respecting every single breath and heartbeat. So it doesn't matter, whether you are homeless. It doesn't matter whether you are a millionaire. It doesn't matter whether you are successful or not successful. What matters is that right to life is, respected. So the Catholic Church says we also have to respect our own bodies, right? Like, you want to toss in issues with euthanasia or with suicide. Like, we are to respect our own bodies in addition to respecting others' bodies, and that we are a creation created by God, and God has numbered our days. God has said, this is what your life is worth. I paid this price on the cross, and therefore you or no one else gets to take it. And so certainly, that is something that I think we often wrestle with in our culture on many different levels, right? We wrestle with being consistent with the right to life. And so I'm excited to examine that. I think it's fascinating that we brought up some of those topics like homelessness. You're going to talk about, death penalty, abortion. We've talked about abortion. All of these things, I think it's just a beautiful way to reinforce our commitment to life, and that it is to be respected at all times.
Yes, thank you, Bill. And I'm glad that you touched on a lot of those areas because, there are ones that are mentioned right in our catechism, the Catechism of the Catholic Church. And I'm looking at the one on euthanasia. It's on number 2276 for those of you who do like to check out those resources on our catechism. It says, those whose lives are diminished or weakened deserve special respect. Sick or handicapped persons should be helped to lead lives as normal as possible. Whatever its motives and means, direct euthanasia consists in putting an end to the lives of handicapped, sick, or dying persons. It is morally unacceptable. And so it's good that, as Catholics, we have this resource like the Catechism because it's inspired by Christ and written by those who prayed so much, bishops and cardinals, people that came together and wrote these words and prayed upon them. And then, Bill, you also mentioned suicide. It says everyone, and this is number 2280, everyone is responsible for his life before God, who has given to him. It is God who remains the sovereign master of life. We are obliged to accept life gratefully and preserve it for its honor and the salvation of our souls. We are the stewards, not the owners of the life God has entrusted to us. It is not ours to dispose of. And in the Catechism, if you back it up a little bit in that same area, it talks about homicide too, because taking someone else's life, obviously that's not, not honoring life. And so there's so many aspects to it, isn't there, when you really think about how we can honor life? Mickey, I didn't know if you had anything to say on that.
Well, Anne, I think it's great that you touched on like when we talked about suicide then, and we also backtracked a little bit with homicide. And of course, given the fact that I live in the city of Philadelphia, and about a year ago, in 2021, we actually surpassed the total number of homicides, like for the first time in like a little over 3 decades. And it's very sad. It's very alarming to see something like that happening. And it's not just Philadelphia, but cities like Chicago, Detroit, Baltimore, New York, Boston, major cities like that. I mean, we could take this time to, point fingers at like who's leading these cities, but politics aside for now. But we have to really understand that there are people out there that just don't have no regard for human life whatsoever. And it's not, and of course, the previous episode, we somewhat, hint at the people that work in the medical facilities who think that they're doing honest work when, in God's eye, they're doing evil. And of course, they do need our prayers. But here, what we look at is, you look at some of these people, and I remember a priest was saying this, and this was during a homily he gave for the seventh Sunday of ordinary time, about the message of when Jesus talks about loving your enemies and do good to those who hate you, that from the Gospel of Luke. And in it, I think like when he in reflecting on that gospel, people do it out of pure hatred. Like it's like I don't know. I honestly cannot describe it. But what I do believe is what we need now is, well, aside from we do need Jesus to come now. If I am for that for sure. But we have to understand, we have to stop holding these grudges. And that's why there's all these homicides happening. Like people it's an act of cowardice committed by these people. Like you can't just like walk up to them like, hey, why are you different than me with this? Or, why do you have to like, whew. Man, I don't know. I mean, I just like to see stuff like that in the movies instead of like real life. So, and also too, like going also to suicide. I always think of this scene like in It's a Wonderful Life. And we actually talked about this quite a few times, Dan, whether it's like some of our recordings together or when we had conversations like off the camera or off the recordings. But I always think of like that scene where the pivotal moment of that movie when George Bailey was like hanging around like the walkway of the bridge, and he was contemplating suicide, but then he saw his guardian angel, like, well, someone was like in the river, and he jumped in, and the angel said, well, I'm preventing you from, taking your own life. And I thought that was like one of the most powerful things that you can really see in it in a movie, even though like it didn't do so well at first, but it became, a Christmas classic that, airs on NBC, year in and year out. And of course, given for me, like I've struggled with like suicidal thoughts from time to time. In fact, I had a recent episode about it, a year ago when I had that ordeal that happened to me. And mental health is really a big epidemic happening now, especially among my peers. And now there's like many that are having that problem as well, that the suicide rates. And of course, especially we're trying to come out of this pandemic, so to speak, because there's been a high rise of suicides and mental illnesses. And of course, I just like to say to people who are struggling mentally, whether it's because of the pandemic, you lost a job, or you're a veteran who maybe seeing what's going on, with the events of unraveling between Ukraine and Russia, just know that there is help out there. And I strongly encourage you to please reach out, whether it's a suicide hotline, get to adoration if you can. Most importantly, you're needed in this world. That's the bottom line. God put you here for a reason. And taking the easy way out is going to not just take that pain away, but it's going to pass it on to loved ones that were very close to you.
Yeah.
And if you're suffering, take it to the foot of the cross, because Jesus died for you.
Yeah, that's so well put, Mickey. And I think that, you're spot on when it comes to the aspect of suffering, right? Like, we have in our modern culture decided that suffering is bad, right? Like we've made the decision that suffering is bad. And we have figured out ways to avoid suffering, right? I mean, I don't think God wants us to suffer, but when we allow our sufferings, because every person is going to go through stuff in life, right? Every person is going to go through stuff. It is how we direct our suffering, right? And physical suffering has an incredibly important, and mental suffering, has an incredible importance in our lives if we are able to channel it in the right direction. And, this model is Christ's model, right? Like when we think about it, God's plan of salvation, it didn't include transporting our minds to an altered state or magically doing away with all of our pain. Rather, what he did was he showed us that he was willing to become one of us, experience the human condition, redeem us by suffering an excruciating death for us. I mean, that's the model God himself used. So I think if you want to escape suffering, like, with euthanasia or with suicide, like, use the suffering that you're presently going through. And it can be horrible suffering or terrible suffering, right? Use it, bottle it up, and orient it toward the foot of the cross, just as you said, Mickey, because it's so important that we do that. And hopefully that there's some encouragement in that Christ doesn't leave you alone, right? Like he's not saying, oh, you're all alone in this suffering. No, he's actually saying, I am willing to suffer for you and with you to an extent that's beyond what you can suffer, right? Like to an extent beyond what you are able to suffer. I have suffered. I've suffered the rejection. I've suffered the most excruciating physical death on this earth, and also some, incredible mental trauma. I mean, so he is the model for us. He's the perfect model. So I think you have a really great perspective on that, Mickey. It's a really, really good perspective.
I agree. I enjoyed listening to both of you. So I want to thank you, and all the references that Mickey made, and, bringing up the fact that it's also sort of what's in our hearts. You hear about murders and homicides and suicides. A lot of things begin in the heart, don't they? And we're afraid to speak to people, even in our own homes, because we want to avoid those arguments or those disagreements. But when we can come to the table and dialogue in some way, in a humane way, right? We need to learn how to do that a little more in society, I think, is bringing it out into being able to dialogue with people in a humane way instead of having so much anger and hatred and cutting someone off and marginalizing them because you disagree on whatever it is, So that was just great points. And then Bill, everything that you said too, all ties together with what I wanted to talk about next, because the next two topics I think for this program are health. And I also would love to talk about end of life. All of us have elderly friends, whether they're grandparents, parents, whoever, but our culture also needs to respect them too, right? And respect the sick and people who are going through rough times. And in our catechism, in number 2288, under respect for health, it says life and physical health are precious gifts entrusted to us by God. We must take reasonable care of them, taking into account the needs of others and the common good. Concern for the health of its citizens requires that society help in the attainment of living conditions that allow them to grow and reach maturity, food and clothing, housing, healthcare, and basic education, employment, and social assistance. And that's part of, I think, also what it means to be Catholic. I'm also a board member with the Catholic Charities Appeal. I just have to mention that because a lot of those things that I just talked about are things that things like a Catholic Charities Appeal is trying to help the poor, the sick, those who don't have support, right? And so when we help them to get the food, the education, the healthcare, all those things, we're making a difference for them. The other thing, like I said, I wanted to discuss is elderly people, right? I mean, I know that during the pandemic, it was awfully hard for many of our elderly who were in nursing homes and those who were suffering. I didn't know if we wanted to touch on that because I think it's something that we can never forget is being able to take care of our elderly. I know for me, both of, one of my parents is deceased. My father is deceased, was in a nursing home for quite a while, and having to take that time now to help my parents. But it's such a needed thing that we all need to do is to be there for our family and friends. I didn't know if either of you had anything on that.
Actually, and yes, I think it's very important because they're going to go when they're suffering, whether it's, like Alzheimer's, cancer, and there are maybe occasions where they don't really have anyone to visit them. We have a corporal work of mercy known as Visit the Sick. And, it's one thing that you have, like, say your spouse, like, a grandparent or great grandparent, God bless if you have a great grandparent that lives, be close to 100 years old. I mean, God bless them, especially with the advancement in medicine these days. But I think one of the things like we really have to understand is that the elderly, Pope Francis did mention that the elderly have are a reservoir of wisdom, and they have something they can pass on to the younger generations. And believe me, I would bet my bottom dollar they would be telling Generation Z, some of the things that they went through, like, when they went through the Depression, the Second World War, the list goes on. And one of the things that really amazes me is that one of the things that I honestly think that the elderly needs, it's not just like that core people, but it's just like, random people. I mean, of course, sometimes you probably hear about these things, like, let's say, like from like a Nicholas Sparks now, or like those movies that are on there, and they're, even the elderly, they do need companionship, and not just, like kind of like a dating kind of thing, but they need like people to visit them, time after time. And just like, swipe stories. And think about the nurses for a moment, like that work in the nursing homes. How close do you think they are to some of these residents that live there? And the moment that they leave this earth, I think, well, first of all, they will be very devastated because they got very close to them. They were like their closest friend.
Mm.
And of course, this goes to like any nurse whatsoever, not just like in the nursing homes, but like how often do they have to, like, there are maybe like 2 or 3 nurses assigned to a certain patient that's staying overnight at the hospital, maybe because of like a heart attack, stroke, or whatever else that prompts them to stay in longer than just a 12, that would prompt them to stay like overnight or whatsoever. But there is some beauty when younger people get to visit an elderly, whether it's someone close to them and family, or it's just like a neighbor, or even just a spontaneous person. And it's just like, week after week, they talk about things, and the elderly will probably offer them wisdom. And there'll be probably times they'll be like, if especially they're suffering from like dementia and Alzheimer's, it would be like, they're like, their memory's a little spotty or something. But it also takes some patience too, if you can do it. I mean, I'll be honest, sometimes my patience is okay. Sometimes my patience is not, to spend the kind of day I'm having. So, but just free nickels of advice for people. If you are aware of your neighbor, a family member who is at a nursing home, at a rehab center, and maybe they're a little lonely or something, go visit them. It's worth it. Trust me.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, it's a corporal work of mercy, visiting the sick, visiting those who are, shut-ins or whatever. I mean, these are corporal works of mercy. And, we have to be merciful, especially during this season of Lent. It's something that we can do. Putting our faith into action during this particular season is also very, very important, So the more and more you visit, the more and more you also give dignity to that life, right? Like there's something that you are doing when you give that visit or you share that time. It says your life still matters, right? You're not alone. And so doing that is a very important thing. And so, I really think that you're both are spot on for, mentioning this as a life issue, right? Visiting the elderly, visiting those who are chronically ill, and spending time with them, is totally not only worth it for you personally to grow spiritually, but it's also something that is necessary to do, to obtain, heaven, right? I mean, Jesus said, "Those who you visited me when I was sick and in prison, uh, you get to be welcomed into my home. Those who didn't, different story." So, something very important to reflect on. Have you been doing that, and how have you been doing that?
Thank you both for all the wisdom that you're giving us during this program. This is just like a two-part series. Like I'm thinking we need to do more of these. I mean,
I agree.
even
Yeah.
though we'll end it just for this one, but maybe keep a watch out there because we might be able to do it again. We didn't get to touch on, I know we're running out of time almost pretty soon, but we didn't get to touch on and keep an eye some of those other areas. But I just invite everyone to go to your catechism and read about issues such as, assisted suicide and, all the different health issues that we need to be aware of and what the Catholic response is. And I know that we were also going to touch a little bit on those who are in prison and having respect for them and their families. And, and by respect, but what I mean is offering them their prayers for recovery and also being able to make outreach to the families of prisoners and even those who, as Catholics, we don't believe in capital punishment, right? And so read about those things, read and learn about them. But I didn't know if we wanted to, before we ended pretty soon, if any of you had any opinions or anything you wanted to share on any of those areas.
I mean, for me, I just would touch on the death penalty very quickly, and that our church really has continued to listen. They've continued to listen. Pope John Paul II was an incredible instrumental pope in how he approached the death penalty and the dignity of each human person. In fact, in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, the 1994 edition, it was his words which were quoted. Cases in which the execution of the offender is an absolute necessity are rare, if practically non-existent. And again, the church has continued to listen to his voice and to the voices of others as society has continued to progress with its understanding and abolition. And so Pope Francis has taken it even further to the point where he said recourse to the death penalty on the part of legitimate authority following a fair trial was long considered an appropriate response to the gravity of certain crimes and an acceptable, albeit extreme, means of safeguarding the common good. Today, however, there is an increasing awareness that the dignity of the person is not lost even after the commission of profoundly serious crimes. In addition, a new understanding has emerged of the significance of penal sanctions imposed by the state. Lastly, more effective systems of detention have been developed, which ensue the due protection of citizens, but at the same time do not definitively deprive the guilty of the possibility of redemption. And then consequently, the church teaches in the light of the gospel that the death penalty is inadmissible because it is an attack on the inviolability and dignity of the person, and she works with determination for its abolition worldwide. And that was an update to the Catechism in 2018. If you're looking for that, it's paragraph 2267. If you have the 1994 edition of the Catechism, you will read John Paul II's, and I do encourage you to take a look at what Pope Francis updated it, which I just read in 2018. Again, it's something that the church has been growing with. I don't think it is I don't think it's a new teaching, right? I think it's a growth and development of that teaching and our understanding, and also the fact that we have significant penal sanctions and better modes of detention for criminals so they don't go back out and reoffend. Like if you have a life sentence and we now can have a life sentence without parole, and that means that you will remain there until your natural life is over, and you've drawn your last natural breath without offending anybody else. And we now have that in most countries in this world, and so that's the reason why. So I just wanted to throw that in there. It might have been a little long, but I think it's just important to put in there on this topic of end of life issues.
Bill, thank you. I'm glad you did, especially that part about the catechism, the update from 2018. I think it's good to know, and it's good to check it out. So this might be an episode that you want to listen to again, since we do have a lot of references there and places that you can go back. And I think as we're kind of coming to a close pretty soon, is that respect for the dying too. That's also in the catechism. It says the dying should be giving attention and care to help them to live their last moments in dignity and peace. They will be helped by the prayer of their relatives, who must see to it that the sick receive at the proper time the sacraments that prepare them to meeting the living God. And maybe that's kind of a good place to end it. Aside from the fact that in the catechism also right after that, it talks about safeguarding peace, which I think is a perfect thing for us to also remember, that when we think of respecting life, we think of individual humans, but we have to think about our world too. And that it is a good thing to pray for peace, because it says in the catechism under 2302 that by recalling the commandment, you shall not kill, our Lord asks for peace of heart and denounce murderous anger and hatred as immoral. And that means both individually and also collectively and communally, right? Yeah. So it's just a good thing to think about. We have a good God, don't we? I mean, we have the sacraments of the church. So for those who are dying, we have that the last sacrament that you can receive, that you can be cleansed, right? For people who perhaps they're in nursing homes, and perhaps it might even be difficult for them to make a last confession because of something like dementia or Alzheimer's. So it's beautiful that we have these sacraments. And I didn't know if either of you had any final words, because I'd love to also talk about some resources before we end. All of our websites, and also some of those beautiful pro-life websites too that we want to draw people to.
I just like to say that choose life. Your mother did, most especially. But life is a gift. Your life matters, no matter if you're white, black, Hispanic, Asian, Middle Eastern. The most important thing is you are God's children. That's the first and foremost thing. And that's how you must identify yourself, as a child of God. Everything else, race, gender, can come next.
Absolutely. That's a good place to end, I think, almost, isn't it? And let's talk about some of those resources too, because we're friends with a wonderful pro-life organization. We definitely want to ask you to check them out online. They're called the Pro-Life Union of Greater Philadelphia, where Mickey and I are from, and even where Bill was from originally, prolifeunion.org. We have the Philly March for Life on Saturday, March 26th in Center City, Philadelphia. So check out that website too. Please join us if you're in the area. And even if you live outside of Philadelphia, everybody's invited. I mean, people come from all over to go to a March for Life. And so we'd love to see you there. I also want to invite you to subscribe to Bill Snyder's podcast at patchworkheartradio.org and Patchwork Heart Ministry. Please do like and subscribe to all of his channels, and our very good friends who are probably streaming this for us right now, Fiat Ministry Network, and Kent Kolhosky and Jennifer Sinclair, who do so much for us at the St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation. We're so blessed. And lastly, please do, if you haven't yet, please do subscribe to our own website at nonnatus.org. We are at the St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation on social media, and also another one, Philly Nonnatus. You could check those two out on all the different channels, Instagram and also Twitter, Facebook, all of those. We'd love to connect with you there. And be sure to make your free pastoral consultation with us at nonnatus.org on the contact form. Make your appointment with a Mercedarian friar. Everything that we do is free because we're a 501c3 Catholic nonprofit, and we're there for you. The church cares, and so does the St. Raymond Nonnatus Foundation. Thank you, Mickey and Bill, for joining us for this wonderful Womb to Tomb program.
Absolutely. And it's awesome. And I agree. We'll have to do more of this.
Thank you for having me, Ann. And yes, we must do it again.
We must. Everyone have a beautiful rest of Lent. Stay in touch with us. We're here for you. And I also invite you to check out the podcast that we do at the Philly Nonnatus YouTube channel. Mickey and I and Bill Snyder and I have the Sowing Hope podcast. If you go to patchworkheartradio.org, you can learn more about that too. A lot of great Catholic programming. We'll see you all next time. God bless.
In the Gospels, Jesus asks his disciples an important question. Who do you say I am? Over 2,000 years later, this question continues to reverberate in the human heart. Some have only given this question a cursory thought. Others have spent years pondering the answer, searching the scriptures, and looking for evidence. This spring, Fiat Ministry Network and Patchwork Heart Ministry team with researchers and experts who have studied the Shroud of Turin to once again pose Christ's question to you. Who do you say I am?
Today, many students go to college with numerous questions about their faith, yearning to know if the seed planted in them as a child is both true and practical. Using the miracle on the road to Emmaus as a model, young adult ministers conversed weekly for 3 months with college students about the most pressing questions they had about the Catholic faith. As they journeyed together virtually, something amazing happened. Doubts disappeared, fears faded, and Jesus revealed that he is still alive. Hearts Burning Within Us, the latest book from Patchwork Heart Ministry, is a result of that grace-infused conversation. It is the perfect back-to-school gift for recent high school graduates and current college students. Get your copy for them today at patchworkheart.org or by calling 424-704-3278. That's 424-704-3278.